I want to welcome you. This is an important part of what we do as the Historical Society, both as the expression and interpretation of our history, but also as a fundraiser for the Historical Society, and it helps to pay the operating expenses for the museum and the Archives and Records Center. So it has dual purpose, and we appreciate your support for that reason. We are very pleased today to have a special guest speaker, and Mary Ann Kemper, I will have the pleasure of introducing here. She has, since her retirement, combined her lifelong love of history and textiles with a particular interest in quilting patterns, fabrics, and the related history of quilts from 1810 to 1870. She's been a featured speaker at Quilt Guild meetings and historical reenactments in the greater St. Louis area. She's a member of the American Quilt Study Guild based in Lincoln, Nebraska, where she serves as a Missouri representative. She has studied quilt repair and repairs old quilts on a limited basis. She is interested in quilt documentation and has recently chaired a project of this nature with the Lincoln County Historical Society and the Evening Quilters Group of Moscow Mills, Missouri. She is also a continuing student of antebellum quilts, especially slave and Quaker quilts. She hails from Troy, and we're very pleased that she took the time and effort to get over here and join us today. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mary Ann, turn the program over to her, and we're continuing to let the computer doing whatever it's doing, and hopefully it'll be back on into the slide presentation here momentarily. Thank you, Mary Ann.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to come. I bring you greetings from the Lincoln County Historical Society. I am a 20-year board member there, and I understand the fundraising business and speakers and all that kind of thing, and I commend you for being here and for supporting your local history affiliate. So many times we think history happens someplace else, but in my travels with my husband for many years throughout the United States, our best historical experiences have been in small towns and in small historical societies, visiting with people and finding out about their stories. And the stories of history are very, very special. And I'm especially interested in the stories of quilts, obviously. Before I go into the project, I want to tell you a bit about American Quilt Study Group. The American Quilt Study Group was founded about 30 years ago in California. And we don't have a museum like the American Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky, or the newly opened Iowa Quilt Museum in Winterset, Iowa. But we are a group that studies the history behind quilts, quilt making, and related textiles. We publish a book once a year called Uncoverings, and this is made up of research projects. Then 4 times a year, a small, like magazine-type publication comes out, which is called Blanket Statements. And this has shorter projects which people have done research on. And it's unbelievable, all the different topics that you can find. My venture into all of this started about, I think it was in early 2012, when our church was, and I should say Zion UCC in Troy, Missouri. We were getting ready to celebrate our 125th anniversary. And so I was supposed to prepare an article about quilts. So I started going back through the church records and the women's records and so forth, and I found it very, very interesting. And in fact, there was one place where the women's group sent 2 members of the board, sent 2 members of the group to the church council board and told them that they didn't like the way that they were spending the money that they had given them. They wanted it to be taken, the principal down, not just pay the interest on the loan for building the new church. So anyway, there was all kinds of things like that. So I thought, well, I wonder if there's any comparison how this would compare with local UCC churches. So I went down the road about 5 miles to Moscow Mills to Freedom's and looked through their records, and I found a lot of similarities. And then I also went to Old Monroe to St. Paul's and found that there were a lot of records there that fit into these patterns. I thought, I wonder if there's others. So I was talking about this with a friend of mine from North Carolina who is in the American Quilt Study Group, and she's quite a writer. And she said, well, why don't you do a study? Pick out some big churches, the little churches, and so forth. And I said, oh my goodness. And I said, oh, I'm not sure I want to do all of that. And I kept getting these emails. What have you done? What have you done? So finally, I thought, okay. She said, why don't you do this? Do a proposal and make it in an abstract form and submit it to the board and see if there is interest in this. And so I did in April of 2012. And 1st of June, I received, yes, we want you to do this, to make a presentation at our poster session in Milwaukee in late October. Well, I had, in between times, picked up some more information about quilts and quilters, and this is what happened. It's an unbelievably interesting story. So I want to read to you a couple of things, and then tell you that up here there's a stack of papers that has the complete study and results. There's also some reproductions of those up here on the folder. There's information on quilt care and also some pamphlets about the American Quilt Study Group. And I'll let you take those at your leisure afterwards. Also, there are 2 books up here. This one, which is open to St. Peter's in Owensville, and it has photographs and information about the total quilt study. And it's about this thick, but people generally like to look through it. The other book that's open, I'll tell you about later, because that's going to be a challenge to you. So, this is what the thrust of the program, the research study, was about. The influx of German settlers to the lower Missouri River Valley during the late 1800s gave roots to today's United Church of Christ in this area. Here, congregations in towns and the surrounding countryside began their existence as faith communities. These congregations' women soon developed needlework skills in the quilting art of their English neighbors. But true to their evangelical synod heritage from Germany, and before the turn of the 20th century, these skills were recognized by church leaders and local community members as ways to help support institutions of education and social justice that the synod founded in East Central Missouri. Do the same churches continue to use quilting as a revenue source to support these institutions in the 21st century? What kinds of quilts and quilting took place? Were there benefits of quilting other than financial? Reviewing the 9 churches' official records, interviewing present-day quilters from these congregations, and the research of previously published material related to the subject indicates the continued use of quilting as a revenue source for church mission work over a 125-year period. What did all 9 churches have in common with their quilting? And the one thing that I found that was exactly the same about all of them was their mission quilting thrust was for the Emmaus Home. And Emmaus Home groups, I see smiles on faces because people know of the Emmaus Home. And that was amazing to me. There were all kinds of little things that were like, maybe 2 here, 4 there, but every single one of them, the Emmaus Home was part of their mission work. So, the conclusions that I reached. Do the same churches continue to use quilting as a revenue source to support mission efforts in the 21st century? Yes. Of the 9 churches surveyed, 3 no longer have quilting groups. 6 still have active quilting groups whose financial earnings continue to support the congregation's mission efforts, both local, community ones, and ones in other communities, such as food pantries, crisis nurseries, abused women and children's shelters, and institutions with strong ties to the United Church of Christ, the Emmaus Home, the Evangelical Children's Home, which is now called Every Child's Hope in St. Louis, the Festival of Sharing, which just took place in Sedalia this weekend. Also, funds were really used regularly for local church needs, from support of youth groups to kitchen supplies, window blinds, worship aids, and church renovation projects. They did a wonderful job hanging blinds and curtains all over this area. The 6 congregations with active quilting groups have a higher median age than 20 years ago. One group had a median age of 67, and the others were well into the 70 to 80 year range. There are 3 of the 6 groups that have 7 to 12 quilters in 2014, and 2 groups with 3 quilters each, and 1 group with 5 quilters. And I put that in there because so many people say, oh, hand quilting is a dying art. It is and it isn't. There aren't as many, obviously, but there are a lot of people that are finding there's a wonderful relaxation with that needle going in and out and in and out. Other people choose to use their creativity in new ways, such as machine quilting. And that's just a different way of doing the same kind of thing. So the second question was, what kind of quilts and quilting took place? Prior to 1950s, almost all of the quilt tops were piece patterns, many from recycled materials such as good fabric from used garments. Piece patterns were of the same as most of the general quilting population. 9-patch and its variations, log cabin, double wedding ring, bow tie, dress and plate, monkey wrench, grandma's flower gardens. And this story comes straight from Owensville, St. Peter's. One quilter told, don't you laugh, Dolores. One quilter told of how her mother would save her father's tobacco bags that he put in the front of his overalls. She would wash them, let them dry, open them up, whiten them out, and she used them for off-white patches in her quilts. And she was a quilter that we interviewed. Applique tops were found dating from the 1930s and are used still today, but not as frequently. After 1960, more and more embroidered blocks were pieced in different settings and sashings, all very often from pre-marked blocks and or kits or quilt tops. Comforts or tied quilts were found in the records of all but one group throughout the 20th century and even today. There was one group that when their quilters felt like they couldn't handle the exacting quilting of a regular quilt, they quilted mattress pads for the Emmaus Home, which I thought was a really great way of making people feel like they still had something to contribute. Varied quilting designs were observed with a strong use of organized linear patterns, which has been documented in the German quilting patterns. And there's a really good example of this in this doll quilt, which was made from parts of an old quilt. I found it in Herman. And that line quilting, you'll see a couple of really good examples of it from some of the 1960s ones in the photographs. Quilting pattern guides were made from cereal box tops, as well as today being cut from mylar plastic, or purchase guides by all of the groups. And third, were there benefits other than financial from these groups? 100% yes. These are how they listed them in order. A, the first one, the fellowship and caring for members of the group, their congregation, and respective communities. St. Paul's, Marthasville, Audrey Meyer. Sometimes we fuss about the quilt because it's hard to stitch, but we always carry on. That happens in Troy, too. And St. Charles, which is the largest congregation. St. John, St. Charles, Ethel Stewart said, you know, it's a kind of therapy. And I'm going to quote Dolores. Even though our numbers have declined, being together is the most important part. So Dolores, you went all over the United States with your words. Secondly, quilters in the churches are the go-to groups. When a local congregation wants to begin a project, they would go to the quilters or the Women's Guild sometimes. And that's probably the most continuing legacy of these congregational quilting groups. And in the last 2 years, I read a lot of things about the documentation of Kansas quilters, especially in the Mennonite, in the Methodist and Baptist traditions, and it's the same thing. Exactly. They want something done, they go to the quilters. And third, with their assistance to the research, in looking through the various church records, almost all of the groups interviewed said that they wanted to look further into their local women's group or congregation's history. Second, they would like to work at creating safe and fireproof repositories for the records. And third, since most of these early church records were in German script, until the 1920s or early 30s, they expressed interest in having the records translated. Surely, if we could get these translated, we'd have an even better picture of how this came about. Okay. Okay. That part I can do. This shows 2002 Emmaus Home Bazaar and the quilt auction. And many of the quilts that churches from this area have given to the Emmaus Home are sold at auction. And this was one, not a one that means tide. Sometimes it's called comfort for St. John's at Catholic, and that's sold for $175. And this is Benny Osage United Church of Christ. This is the first church in the Evangelical Synod, Mother Church, if you will. They had a large quilting group, but they do not have any longer. Some of the ladies go to St. John's Catholic to quilt. Next. One of the things I found was the congregations, especially the rural ones, use the German school to have their quilting activities. And this is the one at Benny Osage across the creek there, for those of you that might be familiar with that. That's where they quilted. And then they built a hall, and they quilted there until they don't quilt anymore. Next one, please. This is Freedom's United Church of Christ in Moscow. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay? And there is no longer a quilting group there. However, they do sponsor a community quilting group that meets there, but only about 5 of them are still members of that church. And this is their new church. Next. And this is the old Freed's Church, which belongs to another non-denominational congregation. Next. These, the lady that was kind of the mover and the shaker of the Freedom's group took all kinds of pictures. So these are pictures of their quilts. This was a 94. Here again you see the leaf pattern, and you'll see that repeated in a number of the different quilts. Next. And this is another one in 1980. Again, the embroidery set with sashing. Next. And this was 2000 flower basket. And Gladys pieced it, and then the Freedom's quilters quilted it. And they stopped quilting in 2004, I believe it was. And then they sent it to the Emmaus Home auction. I think this was the last one that they did as a group. Next. This is St. John's Kaplan, Forestdale, Missouri. And they still have a very active quilting group. Next. Now this is a German school, and they keep it up, and they have various different things in it. But the interesting thing in that is they still have on the ceiling the big pulley-like things, and they would, on Sunday morning after Sunday school, they would let the quilt down on the rack, and they'd tie it off. And the ladies would come in and quilt, and then when they finished quilting, they pulled it back up to the ceiling. And it stayed there for Sunday school and other activities during the week, and then they would go through that each time. They are still very, very active, and they have all kinds of records. Next. And also have a lot of books in German that have been saved. This is in 1983. They always have a picnic raffle. This is the double wedding ring. And these are pictures of pictures, so the colors are a bit faded. This is a broken star, 1989. You can see their quilting frame set up there. Next. And this is bow tie. And this is when the Femi Osage, 1990, started coming over and quilting there. So they quilted together for about 15 years before. I don't think there's anybody that goes from Femi Osage over to St. John's. Next, please. This is their minister who just retired. Devin Jones spent his whole pastoral career at St. John's. And he liked to be a part of everything. He's a very artistic gentleman, and he liked to tie things. So this all got started because he wanted to quilt, and the ladies wouldn't let him, so they taught him how to knot. So they always called him Knotting It. And I laughed when I took this picture down to him because he works in Troy. He's retired now, and just for fun, does arrangements at a flower shop a few blocks from my house. And so I took it down to him. He said, "Wow, where did you get that?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not going to tell, but you got a lot more hair, Devin." But this is another thing. A lot of times people don't realize that the knotting process was very common. And a lot of people paid the churches to have it knotted or tied quilts. And they still, in many cases, do today. We sent 14 child-sized knotted comforters to Festival of Sharing for the Backpacks of Love from Zion Church in Troy. So there's a lot of use for those tied quilts still. Next, please. This is a beautiful thing. It's Dresden plate with a star in the center, but this is machine quilted. It's when you have very high quality of machine quilting, you have a very beautiful quilt as well. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, here is that same pattern that we saw from Freedom's in Moscow, only it's done a little bit differently. Same color scheme, but with the prairie points on it. That was 2004. Next, please. And this again was a machine quilted, which that person really had to do a very good job and know what they were doing because of the fact it was embroidered instead of pieced, and you could catch very easily. So that's quite another thing. Next, please. Then this is one of their advertisements there, and it lists names of people and places, which makes me think, do please, if you're involved in quilting or if someone gave you some quilts, label them so that you have the story of that quilt. Case in point, I have a friend in Arkansas who is a friend in Louisiana, and Becky likes to, quote, do her house, and when she does quotation mark her house, she changes everything. She went through a period she liked shabby chic, and she had some beautiful old quilts of her grandmother's, and she had them displayed in many different ways throughout her home, and just lovely. Well, she decided she wanted to do a different mode of design, and so she was just going to get rid of them because her son was working as a missionary in Africa, and he said he didn't think he wanted them. And she was going to take them to Goodwill, and she was talking to her friend Nancy, my friend in Arkansas, and she said she was going to load up these quilts and take them to Goodwill. And Nancy said, "Oh, please, please stop, don't do that. I've got a friend in Missouri that I know would just love to have those," because she knew exactly who it was and where they made them. And so the next time that Nancy's husband came to Missouri to meet with my husband for a Kiwanis meeting, got this huge box of 5 quilts, and they were made in Texas in the 30s. And they are a study in fabrics. Oh my goodness, the shirtings and the calicos and the matching of different designs of fabric is just amazing. So do label your quilts so that people will know who made them, when they were made. And the thing that I am finding out the more I study is that genealogists look to quilters because they can put them in a place and a time. So that if I'm down on the back of a quilt, they know this person was in this place at this time and they were doing this, and it links them up. Signature quilts are really, really amazing sources of information about people. But that's a story for a different day. Next, please. St. John's in St. Charles, and this is the largest church in the study. Next, please. This group also has, along with Zion and Union, has the largest groups of quilters. Now these are the ladies that quilt, and they just quilt. That's their job. They have a space about as big as this room, and they are in that just quilt. Next, please. These ladies make the comfort tops, and the lady on the right is one fast person. Let's see, 2 years ago she was 85, and she ran that little sewing machine back there. The 2.5 hours I was there constantly. She did 2 tops. Now the pieces were all cut out, but she had them going just lickety cut, and they take those and they go to the veterans home down at the Veterans Hospital at Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, and they keep the beds covered that way. That's their mission. Next, please. These are the ladies that tie. Some of them, like this lady right here, who were quilters before arthritis got into their fingers really bad, just do the tie, and they will do about one time. They meet on Wednesdays, and they just work and chatter, and they are so much fun. Next, please. And these ladies, their job, they don't quilt, they don't tie, they put the bindings on. So it's really a very well-oiled machine, and they get a tremendous lot done. And what you can't see is, all along this wall, is this huge walk-in closet, and they roll everything in there. There's the sewing machines on rollers, the quilt racks fold up into the wall, and everything. So when they leave, it's open for all the other activities that take place in the church. So this is a very large congregation, but they also have an ongoing ministry to Emmaus and to others, as well as the veterans. Next, please. This quilt is right there, and that was given to my husband and I in 1979. He had finished his term as Kiwanis governor for Missouri and Arkansas, and each lieutenant governor did a square and signed it. And it was taken in the St. John's Quilters did it. So they were saying, oh, I don't think we've got anything that we can show. And I said, I know you have one because I have it in my home. The thing that I find so interesting there, we have really used that quilt, you can see that it's beginning to wear, is the fact that the lady that organized all this had them to sign their names, and then they embroidered them in ecru color. So to see it, you don't see that it's a signature quilt, but there are 24 signatures on that quilt. And so it's a combination of all late 20th century quilting things, prairie points, the cross-stitch, embroidery, signature quilts, all of those things. Okay, next. This is the lady I pointed to up there, card trick. She likes the piece. She doesn't care much about quilting anymore. She just had her 95th birthday 2 weeks ago, and she is still sewing. Now, she doesn't do bed quilts anymore, but she does lots of other quilting pieces. Okay, next. And this is one of their Emmaus quilts, monkey wrench variation for 2011. Okay, next. Now this is St. Paul in Marthasville, Missouri. and they just have 3 quilters. But they do they only get one big one a year, and they use that for their quilt raffle, and then they do one other one for Emmaus, and then if they have spare time, they say they'll do another one for pay, as Lula. This is Lula right here. Go to the next one. See, there again is that same pattern. So it was a very, very common pattern around the turn of 2000. Okay, next please. This is my favorite. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was all cross stitch, and it had lots and lots of little quilting. And the 3 ladies had embroidered and had quilted it. So I could hardly wait to see what it was like. Audrey showed me a picture of it not too long ago. And again, they do that. Well, that's okay. They do that in terms of thinking of it as a mission. Okay, this is St. Paul's at Old Monroe. It's out on a hillside between Winfield and Old Monroe. And next, please. Again, German schoolhouse, and they quilted there before the church hall was built. There's no longer a quilting group there, but there's a lot of interest in quilting and needlework and this type of thing. It's a little congregation, like many in rural areas, struggling to keep going, but they are doing it. A friend of mine, and you'll see her quilts in just a minute, said that she remembered walking to school, because if you walk from her farmhouse and come this way, we'd go past that door and around down the road behind the schoolhouse. And she said that if it was a nice day, her mother and her aunt would call out to her and say, "Now you could come by for lunch." She said she always went back and went to lunch, because the lunch at the quilters was much better than what she had in her lunch bucket for school. Okay, next one please. Okay, this is a square within a square, 1960s, St. Paul's quilters stood, and it's really hard. Can you see it at all over there? Okay, it's really hard for me to see here. Let's look at the next one, because this is a really good example. I talked about German linear quilting. Okay, you can see all of these lines, they're straight lines, and then you have the zigzags, but they're created by straight lines. There aren't curves here. And again, up here with this grid. English people brought quilting to the United States. The Germans were the weavers, the knitters, but they soon learned as they came from Germany and assimilated into the culture. They learned to pick up the needle very quickly and learned the art of quilting. And even though the churches of the Evangelical Synod, which are the United Churches of Christ today, and your Lutheran churches, they are quilters in the 20th century, their heritage was actually learned from their English neighbors. And I think that perhaps the German influx, at least in our area here, up this Missouri River Valley, really continues to develop this and to keep it going. Okay, next one. This was, again, a combination of the embroidery and the piecing. This was set together in the 1960s. The lady that owns this was given to her by her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law didn't like to sew and she didn't like to cook. She liked to work out in the fields with her husband. So when Norma married her son, she decided she needed some quilts, and she had friends of hers at the church to make the quilts and the quilt tops, and then she gave them to her. But she didn't put a stitch on them, Norma said, because she didn't like that at all. Again, this is an example, if you can see this outline. Okay, that is from not turning your quilts. It was just left on, folded in a square like that, and that top was up. So a general rule of thumb is about every 6 to 8 months, change the position of your quilts. Even if they are folded up on a shelf, move them around so that they can breathe and also you don't get lines in them. Next, please. And this is the detail. Now, you can see that this is a little bit later than the other pink one because, see the scroll work, the scroll stitching, and more open. The Amish call that the English style of quilting. Okay? And here we are at Owensville. Next, please. And this is a picture in 2012. And I know Dolores, but she can't tell you who the rest of these people are if you're interested in another one. Okay. And then the next one, please. These are the ladies that were there that day. And what were their names? I forgot.
Irma and Velma.
They're sisters, right?
Right.
And those three ladies were regular machines because they turned it, had it ready. You were just starting when I came in, and you took it out of the frame that day. Because Fee said, boy, didn't they work pretty fast? I said, yes. And that's my husband. He was watching. And Dolores had a nice coffee cake for him. He was enjoying himself immensely. But they told the story about the tobacco bags being used. And I think that sometimes we, you'd say, oh, I want to make a quilt. And we'd go to the store and we buy fabric. 50, 100 years ago, oh, I want to make a quilt. I wonder what I can find to do that. You had to be very, very wealthy before you went and actually bought fabric to make a quilt. Next, please. And these, again, are examples of the quilters from St. Peter's. Here again, in the style of the embroidery, and then see how it's set together with sashing. Next. This is a really pretty Irish chain. Look at, you can see the quilting detail in there. It's quilted. Next, please. These are various other items for the turkey dinner. Is that in November?
Yes. Saturday before Thanksgiving.
The Saturday before Thanksgiving. Okay. And Dolores brought is this your last one, or is this a little?
We just made that for a raffle.
Uh-huh.
Raffle, so.
Well, this is a raffle quilt, and that's a raffle quilt. And it looks to me like they're both log cabins, only set differently. And that's the wonderful thing about quilts. There's so many ways that you can do them. I learned to piece a log cabin this past weekend using English paper piecing, and that's fun too. Next, please. This is my church, Zion in Troy. Next. We know that they have been quilting since before 1912. This is my husband's grandmother, and I have a record of her paying $4.50 to have a comfort knotted. And so anyway, they've been doing it for a long time. Next, please. These are the quilters in 1987. The lady on the end is my mom. And again is the business of using embroidered quilt blocks and setting them in different ways. This one doesn't have any sashing in between. The blocks are just butted up to each other. And then a lot of, you can't see it there, but a lot of close quilting around the edges. All these ladies are deceased now, so it's a special picture. Next. This is quilting a quilt, and this was my first adventure into cross stitch. My husband was traveling a lot with Kiwanis, and so I had this bag packed, and I had 12 of these squares. I cross-stitched in red all the way from Poplar Bluff to Kirksville. Whenever we go, because cross-stitch, you know, you don't have to really pay attention to what color you are. And then set it together, and I enjoy using it at Christmas time especially. Okay, next please. This was our quilting group in 2012, to show you how quickly things have changed. We only have 4 left out of that group. And again, a log cabin. It's such a usable pattern. Okay? And then we developed a new group which calls themselves Tie in a Knot. And these ladies wanted to do something with fabric, and they didn't want to quilt. And so a bunch of us made, and are still making, a length of fabric and then 36 inches of, I should say, a width of fabric and 36 inches in length. And then you turn it, you know what I'm talking about, you lay the batting down, the backing, and then the top is inside out, stitch around, turn it, and then they tie it. And these have gone into plastic bags, and there's one in every sheriff deputy's car in Lincoln County, and also in every car in the Detroit Police Department. And then extra ones we take to the Robertson Center for abused people, especially abused women and children. And that way, if someone's brought in the middle of the night, they have something warm to wrap up in. We had the county sheriff talk to us at a mission dinner, and he said they not only use them for children, but they had one night an accident, and they needed to break a window to get this woman out, and they fished one of these quilts, which was actually a child-sized in, and she covered her head and her shoulders to protect herself when they broke the window. So, and he had 2 or 3 other things that they have done with them. So again, mission in the local community, even today. Next, please. This is one that, again, was cross-stitched and then quilted in 2001 for the Emmaus Home. Next. This is an antique quilt top. It's called Crossroads. That has another story for another time about slave quilts, so thank you. This is whole cloth. Do you know what I'm talking about? A whole cloth? I'm glad to see head shaking. It's one of my favorite things. This is my quilt, and I quilted on it with the quilters at church. And the center grid here is 3/8 of an inch, and this grid is 3/4 of an inch. And there was a lady who passed away a few years ago, but she's never quite forgiven me for that. It took over 400 hours of quilting and 400 yards of thread. Now, why she kept track of the thread, I have no idea, but she did. But anyway, I enjoyed that quilt very much. This is the tumbling blocks top that my sister found, and it was in her husband's parents, and she had it set together and quilted. It turned out quite nicely, I think. And this is Zion and Union. They have the 2nd largest quilting group. Next, please. And there they are, doing a very modernistic type quilt. For those of you that are interested in quilts, the tails on the fish are 3-dimensional. You can stick your finger in it. I see somebody raising their head like this. And they have a good sized group. I think there were 14 there that day. Next, please. And their group goes back to 1978. And $200, 1978 was a lot of money. Next, please. And this one raised over $800 for Mobile. Really closely scored. And this is a tide comfort for the Festival of Sharing. Next. And Emmett Fink is a person that goes to Zion and Union, and he was an engineer that's retired, and he has some health issues, so he started sewing, and he creates all of these geometric type quilt tops, and this was made from neckties. And it was really amazing. They have very, very good records. Next, please. And this is one that Ruth Parker, their quilt leader, designed, and it hangs over the balcony in their church home. Okay? Now, we obviously see that this is 2 years old because it's the same jacket. This lady is saying, have you ever heard of Ebenezer Stone Church? Has anybody here ever heard of Ebenezer Stone? Oh, yes, good word. If you want to look on the map here, it shows the little map here where the 9 churches are. This was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I made this information known to the American Quilt Study Group. I was there for an hour and a half, and my job was to answer the questions. I had to answer questions about this church and that church and all of that kind of thing. And basically, what I was doing was explaining that I hadn't just made this up out of my head, that I had actually done research on, and so forth. So, I noticed this lady, she was kind of on the back edge of the group. All during this time, she kept coming over and she would look, and she looked on that map, and she read, and finally, people kind of got away, and she came over and she said, excuse me, in this very, very quiet voice with a drawl, have you ever heard of Ebenezer Stone Church? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, do you know where it is? I said, yes, ma'am. Anyway, her husband's father was a UCC minister at Ebenezer Stone Church years ago, and then he moved to Tennessee. And all her married life, she'd heard her husband talk about playing out at Ebenezer Stone Church. And she thought, it's yours? Oh! And I don't know the lady's name, but she was so thrilled to know that there, one, really was an Ebenezer Stone Church. Secondly, that there was somebody that knew where it was. And I think probably all the 2 years of work and interviewing people was just brought together in that, because here was something that somebody had heard about for a whole lifetime and didn't know that it was really a reality. And what I really wished is I had gone to Ebenezer Stone Church to see if they had quilters there.
And we do.
And they do, and you do. Oh, that's what, there's a lady in Tennessee. So, what about all of this now? Well, it has been 2 years since I have done this. And I've been kind of busy going place to place, working with quilt history for the American Quilt Study Group. But my friend in North Carolina was on my case. In fact, I got an email from her last spring, and she said, have you gotten this down in a form that it could go in blanket statements? That's a quarterly magazine. And I said, oh, Laurel, I just really haven't. My husband's health hasn't been the best this past year. And she said, well, you just need to get at that computer and get it down. And I said, okay. She said, no, that's important, because that's the stories of those churches, and that needs to be kept. But I have done one thing. I have it on zip drive, and it is going to, I've got to do a little polishing a few places. It is going to Eden Seminary, which is our historical church seminary, and they have an archive section. And so it will go to the archives of Eden if anybody ever wants to use it for anything. But that is this book over here. But I'd also like to challenge you, as being part of this community, to think about doing a quilt registry program. This has been in the back of my head and another friend's for quite a while. And we did it in Lincoln County this spring. It was a hard day, a busy day. But we registered 124 quilts in about 7 hours, 7.5 hours. And it's something that can be done. It is not a quilt evaluation. In other words, how much is it worth? It's an attempt to put down what about this quilt, what does it look like, what pattern is it, what are the dimension of it, what type of quilting is it, and this type of thing. And we have it in a notebook. That's what this one is. Our criteria was it had to be either made by or owned by a resident of Lincoln County. So we have old quilts, and we have quilts that were finished this past year. So they said, well, why didn't you just say nothing after 1950? Quilting is an ongoing thing. We don't want people to think it all happened back then. So we wanted to encourage people to come and bring their new quilts as well as their oldest one. The oldest one was over 200 years old. And then we had some that were finished last year. And to me, that was really, really important. The book is in our library in the old jail museum, and we also are working right now to get it onto a DVD so that people can easily access this. One of these days, maybe we'll get everything online. You guys are way ahead of us down here in Gasconade County, but we don't have paid staff or anything. We just have volunteers. But I would really challenge you to think about doing it because you have such a rich, rich heritage of quilting. Not just the German quilters, but all the other different groups. And people say, well, what about, well, why? Who cares? Well, there's one quilt in here that has over 600 names. And it was done as a fundraiser for St. Mary's Catholic Church in Hawk Point. St. Mary's is the Bohemian Czechoslovakian community that came in here in the late 1800s. And they were building a new church in Hawk Point, coming from the Moshik area, and this was a fundraiser. And all these names, you know why it's important? Because people can come back and they can say, oh, this is the year it was auctioned off, this is the year it was made, this person was there, this person was alive, this person was a member of this community. And our local genealogy society came and photographed each block of that quilt because of the names on it. And that is one of they say, anybody says something about, well, where did so-and-so live? I think he went to St. Mary's Church in Hawk Point. They go to that as a source. So I would encourage you to do that. As a member of the American Quilt Study Group, I have forums, and I'd be glad to come down and help you with organizational meetings. It's a nice drive, except I think in February I want to go down those hills for Burma. But I really would encourage you to think about that and to do it. I think it's really important to keep track of our heritage. And it doesn't have to be just quilts, it can be many other things. Now, I know that you have other things to do, but I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions about anything that I have said, what you have seen up here, whatever. Yes?
To your knowledge, you have focused, of course, on the United Churches of Christ.
Uh-huh.
What about other denominations? Is it, I mean, I know that, for example, in our area, some of the Catholic churches.
Yes. The Catholic churches, the Lutheran churches, and actually sometimes like Methodists and Baptists do too. I just focused on the United Church of Christ. That was my denomination. But especially when you get out into Kansas and to Nebraska, you'll find whole books on just Mennonite quilters. And the Mennonites still have those big auctions in Kansas City area, North Kansas City. The Amish do the same thing. Up in Jamesport, they have an auction once a year. But yes, I think that there is that, and there's another research project for people. We have done in our church 2 quilt registrations, just to have. We have, I think, 80-some quilts, and we haven't done one for quite a number of years. And basically, it's photographing it and then measuring it and finding out the history about it. So, yes.
How do you recommend storing your quilts? Like, my mother recently gave me a number of quilts, and I don't know the best way to store them when they're not on display. What do you recommend?
I usually tell people, especially if they're empty nesters, if you have a spare bedroom, put them, stack them one on top of the other like that. Because then there is very little pull or weight on them. And do that. I would suggest that if you have them folded, you have them in acid-free boxes. And if it's really old, like this one that was 200 years old, it was just a quilt top. But she had acid-free tissue paper and had stored it in the holes, so nothing was ever a hard crease. And then refold them. Many museums keep them on rollers, but you know,
I don't have those.
nobody that I know has space for them. The International Quilt Study Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska has just unbelievable. They have these huge drawers, and they just lay them out one on top of the other. Warrenton, the museum in Warrenton, Warren County, they have some hanging things. It's a really neat system. They pull out like this, and then they are over a large hanger, and they hang down. But the two things you want to do is not store them in plastic, the older ones, and then secondly, refold them. The other thing is if you have them in a closet, and there's nothing wrong with keeping them in a closet, be sure that you cover the boards of the closet. You can use a good polyurethane covering, but I would suggest to take in some old unbleached muslin, wash it, and then, or old sheets or something that you put that on first, and then put your quilt on. Because lots of times, well, wood disintegrates down, and that will make, you know, brown marks on your quilts. The big thing is to fold and refold and to use them. In terms of washing quilts, never dry clean a quilt. I had a lady that spilled something on this quilt, and unbeknownst to me, I think I covered up the place. Yeah, here it is. Unbeknownst to me, she came and asked my husband, she said, I spilled this on Mary Ann's quilt, and I want to get it taken care of, so he let her take it. She took it to the dry cleaners.
Oh,
Yes, oh gee, that's right. And that's a very dangerous thing. The only kind of thing that you would possibly want to do that would be like a crazy quilt, or that has silk and velvet in it, but I still would hesitate to do that. And so consequently, it took the color right out of this cotton one. If you do have to use a dry cleaner for some way out reason, I would go to the dry cleaner and find out when they changed the solution so that you could put it in at the very first round of cleaning that they would do. But even if I had a quilt, crazy quilt that has velvets and silks in it, what I would do would be to take like a small handheld vacuum cleaner, put pantyhose over it, and turn it on low, and just, it's a time-consuming process, but vacuum, that will get dust mites and things out, and you have much less stress on your quilt. I have a couple of really old quilts of my husband's grandmother's, made back in the 20s and 30s, and I've had to wash them twice, and I did that in the bathtub. Ran it full of water, tepid water, not cold, not hot. Put Orvis. Now you can get quilt repair wash or old antique quilt wash. You can also go to Orslyn or Tractor Supply and get Orvis soap that my children and grandchildren use it too. They show sheet and they wash the wool with that. And mix it up. Get the soap all in there first. Then press it down, let it set. And I would even let really dirty ones set overnight. And then get somebody to help you because they're really heavy to lift up and drain, and then drain out the water and refill it with tepid water. I usually say 6 to 7 times you have to rinse them. And that's a lot of work, really, really is. Some of the newer machines have a very, very gentle cycle. I have one quilt that's about 30 years old, and it was nasty, but I really wanted it, so I bought it at the sale, and I put it in the washing machine on a gentle cycle, and it was okay, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. It was just so nasty, I didn't want to mess with it. But those are some kind of general rules for them. People that store quilts in big plastic bags, I would not do that at all. Wrap them in a sheet, old pillowcases. Old pillowcases is what I use, carry around. So. Again, thank you, and I'm going to leave these things up here. Please look at them. These are copies here of the study. This is our Historical Society's book on quilt registration, information about American Quilt Study Group, 12 tips on quilt care, and then this is the quilt study that I did, and it's open to Ruth and the girls. Thank you very much, and I hope that you will consider doing a quilt registry for Gasconade.
Sounds like a great idea. Well, obviously, we're still using quilts for fundraising, so we do have a quilt raffle, both the one from the church, I gather, going on, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And the one for the Historical Society, so if you're interested in purchasing quilt raffle tickets, please do, because that's also another important way that we support the mission of the Historical Society and the services of the church, right? The mission work of the church. So there is a continuing
Yes.
legacy.
See, you all have just solidified everything that I said up here.
And it's great because I've just got a number of quilts, as we said, you know, and it's, I need to know more about them and how to take care of them. So
That
it's helpful.
makes me think of one other thing. Someone said, oh, what do I use for a quilt label? I don't have any quilt labels. Well, you can buy quilt labels by the yard and cut them up and use them. But to be honest with you, I just keep some muslin that I've washed, and I'll write. In fact, I did one for a lady, and she wanted to know, we had a quilt luncheon bazaar thing, and she bought this quilt, and she wanted to know the story of it. And so I just took a Sharpie permanent marker and wrote the story on the quilt, the muslin. Then I took it and washed it in real hot water, and then I pressed it so that everything was set, it wouldn't bleed or anything. You also can use those pigment pens, are really good for that too. I just didn't have to have one, and she wanted it right then. So put the labels on the backs of the quilts.
Thank you. That was another question I was going to have. How to label things.
Well, and then just when you, okay, you got your, do it better. See, I probably don't have the right corner out here. Here it is. This is one, but it's just hand stitched onto the back of this. And it says, piece by Irene Hardy and quilted by Zion Quilters in 1982, Christmas present to Marianne from Pease, 1982, Brown Log Cabin.
I have an idea I'm going to do with my mom. Have her do one of those for each of those quilts.
Yes, because the one I did for Sally for this quilt, because it was found in a trunk, somebody bought it at an auction, and then they gave it to the church, and then we quilted it. And my guess, it was all little Kate Greenway figures. It was a baby quilt. I'm talking real old, that old linen-y type material, and so we quilted it. So I wrote the whole story, and it's about like this. It's almost as big as the quilt itself.
Well, we have some refreshments to conclude our day here. Jerry Kelman is responsible for the grant that helped. I can't give her attention, but anyway, when you go in there, let's talk a little bit about that. But we have some refreshments in the next room, and I invite you to join us for that. And please come up here and ask Mary Ann questions and look at the materials and take some of the handouts that I can see here. And anyone's interested in raffle tickets, please let us know. And thank you for coming.